They took the president, but fear stayed. A man was seized, flown out of the country, removed from power, and yet in Venezuela, no one is celebrating in the streets. People whisper, they stay indoors, they look over their shoulders. This is what uncertainty sounds like. Some feel relief, but only behind closed doors. Others feel anger, humiliation, defiance. Soldiers stand on street corners. Journalists are detained. Food prices rise overnight. Power has changed hands. But the system has not. I have seen moments like this before. Moments when the world thinks history has turned. But the machinery underneath keeps running. This is not just the fall of one leader. It is a test of what replaces him, and whether fear loosens its grip or tightens it. If you want to understand what really happens after a leader is removed, stay with me. Because to grasp this moment, we must first understand what Venezuela is standing on right now. Nothing about this moment is simple. A president has been taken, but the state remains, the army remains, the loyalists remain. Delcy Rodríguez now holds power, not as a break from the past, but as its continuation. That is the central tension Venezuela is facing. For some, Maduro's seizure feels like the end of a long nightmare. For others, it feels like a national humiliation. For many, it feels like a dangerous pause before something worse. People are not asking who won. They are asking who is in control. Police patrol the streets. Journalists are detained. Protests are watched closely. At the same time, daily life is getting harder. Prices jump. Food becomes scarce. Fear seeps into ordinary routines. This is not a clean transition of power. It is a fragile moment suspended between hope and retaliation. To understand why this uncertainty feels so familiar, we have to look backward at how Venezuela arrived here in the first place. To understand this moment, we need to go back, not to the seizure, not to the raids, but to the system that made all of this possible. For years, power in Venezuela did not depend on one man alone. It depended on a structure, a political movement known as Chavismo. Under that system, loyalty mattered more than institutions. Control mattered more than competence. And survival mattered more than reform. Over time, the economy hollowed out. Food shortages became normal. Medicine disappeared. Millions left the country. Not because they wanted to, but because staying became unbearable. Yet the state endured. Because power was centralized. Because dissent was punished. Because fear became a governing tool. This is why removing a leader does not automatically remove the system. The habits remain, the networks remain, the incentives remain. What we are seeing now is not a sudden collapse. It is the continuation of a long cycle, one that has broken before. And when cycles break, they rarely do so quietly. Which brings us to the first rupture, the moment when this tension finally turned violent. The rupture did not come quietly. It came with force, with helicopters, with gunfire. Dozens of people were killed in the operation that seized Nicolas Maduro and his wife from their compound in Caracas. Among the dead, according to Cuba, were members of its security forces. For some Venezuelans, this was the moment hope broke through fear. Maduro was alive, captured, taken to the United States to face charges. For others, it was a moment of shock. They watched their president wave after landing in the US. To his supporters, it was a symbol of dignity. To his opponents, a reminder of unfinished justice. The streets reacted unevenly. No mass celebrations, no clear victory. Instead, police presence increased. Journalists were detained. Rallies formed, some demanding Maduro's release, others demanding accountability. This was not liberation. It was a shock to the system, and shocks reveal fractures. If you think moments like this end conflict, history suggests the opposite. They expose what was already fragile, because while one man was removed, the machinery of power stayed in place. To understand why this matters, we need to look beneath the surface at the mechanisms that keep the system alive. Power rarely disappears. It relocates. What keeps the system alive is not the leader at the top. It is the web beneath him. In Venezuela, that web is made of loyalty, military loyalty, political loyalty, economic loyalty. Under Chavismo, rewards flowed upward. Protection flowed downward. Those who complied survived. Those who resisted paid a price. That structure did not vanish when Maduro was seized. Delcy Rodríguez was not an outsider. She was his closest lieutenant, a product of the same system, a guardian of its interests. This is why fear remains. Police patrols are not temporary. Detentions are not accidental. They are signals. Signals meant to remind people where power still lives. At the same time, the economy reacts instantly. Prices rise, supplies shrink, uncertainty becomes inflation. This is how control is maintained, not just through force, but through instability. When people are busy surviving, they have little energy to resist. And that brings us to the second escalation, the moment when uncertainty begins to spill beyond fear and into open confrontation. The second escalation was inevitable. After the shock came the tension, and with tension, resistance, Venezuelans who had lived under years of hardship now faced a stark choice: submit or fight back. Delcy Rodríguez's rise to power did not bring peace. It brought more fear and more anger. Protests erupted in pockets of the country, voices calling for justice, voices calling for change. But these were not the protests of hope. They were the protests of a population pushed to the edge. People didn't just want Maduro gone, they wanted the system gone with him. But in the streets, the state responded quickly. Tear gas, rubber bullets, civilians dragged away in handcuffs. The people fought with what they had: signs, slogans, defiance. But the government fought with everything it controlled. And there were casualties, not just from the fighting, but from the fear of retaliation, fear of loss, fear of what might come next. But the fear did not silence the protests. It only made them more dangerous. The question now is, where does this fight go from here? Will it stay in the streets or spill into something even larger? What happens in the streets doesn't stay there. This is the crux of the crisis. It's not just about the government, it's about the people. On the one side, there is fear. On the other side, there is defiance. The streets are filled with those who have lost everything, but they have not lost their spirit. Marcelo, a student, was cautious in his words, but his message was clear. Maduro's fall was a beginning, not an end. Others felt differently. Rosa Contreras, speaking at a rally for the release of Maduro, said she saw him as a symbol of resistance. His image, as he arrived in the US, gave her strength to protest. But for people like Marcelo, the fight wasn't about heroism. It was about survival. We want him to live every single day behind prison bars, he said. This tension is not just political. It's personal. For the people, it's about what comes next. It's about the future they can or cannot imagine. And that future isn't just determined by politicians. It's determined by the streets, by the voices that rise up or stay silent. Because in the end, it is the people who bear the consequences of any transition. And in Venezuela, the cost of that transition is already being felt. The world is watching. But it is not just the Venezuelans who are feeling the weight of this moment. The shockwaves are spreading. The political instability in Venezuela ripples across the region. Countries with ties to Maduro's government are now facing uncomfortable choices. Cuba, Russia, Iran, each has been drawn into a web of geopolitical maneuvering. Each has its stake in the outcome. What happens in Venezuela does not stay in Venezuela. Neighboring countries brace for impact. Refugees have already fled the country in their millions. But now the flow of people is expected to increase. The situation will worsen before it gets better. For the US, the question is, how far will it go? How much is too much? Trump's words echoed across the world when he said his administration would run Venezuela. But what does that mean in practice? Are we looking at a new geopolitical order? Or simply a reshuffling of old alliances? Whatever happens next, the ripple effects will be felt far beyond Caracas. Venezuela's future is now a global concern, one that will reshape the landscape of Latin America for years to come. What happens next? That is the question no one can answer. But we can make educated guesses. 3 possible futures lie ahead for Venezuela. First, the optimistic scenario. A peaceful transition, a return to stability, economic reforms, a government that listens. In this scenario, Venezuela begins to rebuild. People return. Businesses reopen. The scars of the past begin to fade. But that is the best case scenario. The second scenario is less clear. A slow, painful recovery. The system begins to shift, but it doesn't change overnight. There are reforms, but they are half-hearted. Corruption remains. Fear lingers. And the country is stuck in a cycle of short-term fixes. Finally, there's the worst-case scenario. Violence escalates. The military cracks down harder. Protests are crushed. Civil war threatens. And Venezuela becomes a failed state. No one wants that future. But in the shadows of this crisis, it looms large. The future of Venezuela depends on one thing: whether the people can break free from the fear that has kept them silent for so long. And whether the world outside Venezuela will let them. This is where we stand. A country divided, a future uncertain. Venezuela's story is not just one of power struggles. It is a story of survival. The people of Venezuela have lived through unimaginable hardship. They have endured pain, loss, and fear. But they have also shown resilience, a resilience that cannot be measured by politics alone. As the world watches, the question is not just about what happens to Maduro or even to Rodriguez. It is about what happens to the people. The future of Venezuela is not set. It is still being written in the streets, in the homes, and in the hearts of its citizens. But one thing is clear: the fight for change is not over. It has only just begun. And in the coming months, we will see whether that fight leads to a new beginning or to a deeper crisis. Stay with me, because Venezuela's journey is one the world will feel for years to come.